I know everyone has seen this leak so far, but what does this actually mean for the overworld randomized stats and your ultimate strategy going into PvP and the overworld, especially when open beta hits? I'm going to move my camera for a minute just to show you that there are so many stats here. I'm going to break down all of them, or as many as I can figure out, and then we're going to discuss which Illuvials require which stats and how you should be prioritizing everything to make sure that you get the best Atlas, for example, and make sure it has really great max health defenses and things like that, and don't waste too much energy on giving it good damage stats. Now, ultimately, getting perfect Illuvials is the crowning achievement, something with all of max stats, and that's going to be worth quite a bit to the right kinds of people. But I'm going to go over the sorts of things you should be considering when you can't get a perfect Illuvial every time, because the chances for that could be quite extreme. So, without further ado, let's dive into it. The first thing I want to talk about is the percentages. Now, we don't have the exact number, but let's say it's 20%. For example, if our Axodon here has 10,000 HP, oh no, that's level, sorry. If they have 2,331 max health, you can see it right above my head here. Let's say that that's on a 20% scale. The bottom end being 2,000, and well, that's a bad example. The bottom end being 2,200, and then the top end is 20% above that. So that would be 2,600, or somewhere around there, 2,640 or whatever it might be. But basically, you'd be able to go from 2,200 to 2,600. Now, if its lower end of that threshold was 1,000, then we'd only go up to 1,200, and the difference there is actually 200 points. For an Illuvial with really high max health, let's say a Titanor has 1,000 max health, then the 20% would allow it to get up to 1,200. But your Tatterpy with, say, 500 max health, the 20% up above that would allow it to go up to 600, okay? Which is only 100 points, whereas from 1,000 to 1,200, that is 200 points, which means that a high max health stat on something like a Titanor is way more impactful in raw data points than it is like on a Tatterpy. And this goes for many different things, but when we consider fighters, where they have a typically high attack stat, or a tank like Titanor that has a typically high max health stat, then we can see where we might want to prioritize. Now, the next thing we need to go into is the different stats on this thing. So if we take a look at the Adorius here, we've got them all here. This is quite an old league. I don't know, this is quite outdated, and you'll notice that a lot of the icons are really outdated on this one. But as we can see here, we've got physical attack damage, energy attack damage, attack speed, range, resists, health regen, agility, precision, savagery, omega power, and movement speed, of course. And as we go into here, I've broken down the two different things here. And what I've done is I've tried to isolate all of the different stats that have the potential to be randomized. Starting at the top here, we have max health, and going around to the right, we have omega power, attack speed, total damage, physical resistance, and energy resistance, which are these two here. And then down the bottom here, we can see some of the other ones we were missing. We have attack range. So we can also see all these down here, and that's where I've tried to isolate them. So your attack range is this one here. Attack speed, of course. And then you have agility. I'm not entirely sure what it does. I think it improves your dodge chance. Then we would have health regen, which is what I believe this one might be. You have the two resistances. Then down here, you probably have movement speed. And then what I would assume is the new icon for precision. I could be wrong on that. This one here, I actually have no idea what that is. If you know, or if you want to have a guess of what that could be, leave a comment down below. I have a feeling it's something like disarm chance or something like that, something kind of weird, but I have no idea. And the last one I assume is a new icon for savagery. It looks very similar to the old icon, and then the movement speed looks very similar to the old icon as well. So these are the different stats that I'm expecting to be randomized. And by the looks of this UI treatment, as we go to the previous one, as we look at this UI treatment, you can see that all of these were randomized in whoever mocked this up for the game. Now, this obviously wasn't final, this wasn't in the game itself, but whoever mocked this up thought that every single one of these stats got random. So until that changes, that's what I'm going to assume. So let's take a look at the 5 different classes. I'm not going to have a deep look at these affinities today because they're very similar to the classes, and I'll go over them as well. So firstly, we'll have Bullwark. And I'll have two sections for each of these. The first one is high priority. Get all of these stats as high as you can. Everything else is secondary. The next lot is, if these are high, then absolutely great. If they're not, then it's not too bad. So for Bulwarks or Earth Illuvials, your max health, health regen, and both your resists are no-brainers. These things need to take as many hits as they possibly can. The next two here, because attack speed, they typically don't have very high attack speed, is your Omega Power and the total damage the Illuvial can output, because Bulwarks can do a serious amount of damage, and they typically have very good Omega abilities. So making sure you don't forget about them is important. Honestly, I think Bulwarks, outside of maybe fighters, are the most crucial element to every single team in Illuvium, so this is probably the most important one out of the 5 I'm about to show you, except maybe support. Next, we have Empaths, which are very similar to the nature and sometimes water Illuvials in the way that they're very supportive of the team. Here, you want Omega Power because their healing abilities and things don't come from auto attacks at all. They typically come from the Omega. So the higher Omega Power, the better they can do in support. Attack range to make sure they're as far away from your opponents as possible. Your resistances and max health. These are a little bit less important, but giving them longevity and survivability is quite valuable. The other thing is attack speed, attack range, and total damage. These are kind of good on every Illuvial, and that's why they're appearing here. But really, things like Adorius and some of the other support Illuvials can do a surprising amount of damage, and if you can give them the chance to do extra damage, it definitely doesn't hurt. The next one is the fighters, and these ones are quite obvious. Fighters are weird because they have a little bit of a balance between tankiness and damage dealing. You'll find, since you can't place too many Illuvials on your board, that sometimes if you're going really hard on Bulwarks, you won't have many fighters. And if you're light on Bulwarks, you'll have a lot of fighters, which will fill pseudo into that Bulwark role. It's a very tank role. Fighters are similar to things like, similar like your fire Illuvials as well. And so basically max health, attack speed, and total damage are the 3 key ones here. You want to make sure they're hitting as hard as possible. The other ones are physical resist, energy resist, precision, and savagery. They typically have some really good crit buffs and things, not as good as rogues, but keeping in mind that some, such as Riptorus for example, really benefit from getting some great crit buffs. And obviously the resistances are great because, as I said, pseudo tanks. The next one here is Scions, which are the mages of Illuvium. So Scion or fire, ranged fire, some ranged air and things like that. Air fits into supportive a little bit as well. All of the affinities can go into lots of different roles, but the classes typically stick to one. So for the Scions here, Omega Power is obvious. If you max out Omega Power, if that's the only thing you do, then great, that's important, do that. The other ones are things like attack range to keep them away from your opponents, total damage, and max health. Making sure they survive for as long as possible is quite good. Maybe max health could have gone on the secondaries here, but total damage is good because even though they're the mage class, they actually have some pretty solid damage because they actually do energy damage, and a balance between physical and energy damage is always welcomed. So making sure that their total damage is quite high is going to be valuable. The other things are attack speed because they can do serious damage with their attacks, and physical and energy resist. Now you'll have some really interesting hybrid Illuvials such as Scoriox, which does have great Omega where it actually empowers its attacks. So in that case, you really want that total damage up high, but that makes sense because it's actually part fighter. And as we just saw a minute ago, fighters like attack speed and total damage. So as you get the composites, you'll find that you want to mix and match the priorities for both of them because they typically fill in their roles really, really well. As for later on, you want attack speed, physical resist and energy resist, just to increase that longevity, like pretty much with anything on this list. The last one we've got here are the rogues. Rogues, airs are often rogues, but pretty much anything can be. Some fire rogues like Ramfire are quite strong as well. But you have movement speed. I don't know how valuable this is in general, but I feel like rogues move around quite a bit, especially a character like Gyro here. So movement speed is valuable. It's great. Precision and savagery because they rely very heavily on crits to quickly dispose of enemies. Attack speed and total damage because you can't get much out of your crits without high total damage. So these are the most dependent on stats out of all of these different classes. where they definitely really need a great mixture of things. You could maybe get rid of movement speed. I don't know how valuable it's going to be. And last, Omega power, because they typically have pretty decent Omegas, not as good as many of the other classes, but not bad. So if that's the last thing you get, then Omega is always great to grab. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you guys learned something about these stats and which stats you should be prioritizing for which Illuvials. If you want to learn more, I'm always in the Wildfire Discord hanging out, chatting to people. You can ask me anytime. I might even post this document. Have a good one, guys.